They fired me for lack of dedication, but I was the one who saved the billion-dollar project. Before we begin, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever worked late, not for applause, not for credit, but because you knew if you didn't, everything would fall apart? And then just days later, the people who never stayed past 5 accused you of not caring at all. That's where my story begins, with an email. Cold, brief, and final. Subject line termination for lack of commitment. It came in at 7:42 a.m. on a Monday. I was halfway through a lukewarm cup of Tim Hortons coffee, standing at my condo window in Mississauga, watching early February snow fall like salt over the sidewalk. My hands trembled, but not from the cold. I refreshed the screen 3 times, hoping the subject line would change. That maybe I'd misread it, that this wasn't real. But it was. After 11 years with Evertech Infrastructure, 4 of them on Project Aegis, one of the largest urban transit projects in Canada, I was being let go. Not for theft, not for failure, but for lack of visible engagement. That phrase stuck like frost in my lungs. Lack of engagement. I had bled for that project. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed my brother's wedding because we were finalizing the structural load protocols during winter permitting. I stayed up past midnight double-checking code for a subcontractor who couldn't tell metric from imperial. And now I was disengaged. My name is Evan Mathers. I'm 42. And I've spent the last decade building other people's futures. Foundations, highways, systems that hum beneath cities most people take for granted. I don't chase attention. I don't play politics. I build what lasts. But apparently, that's not enough when you're not loud about it. The email was signed by Patricia Kellner, Director of Operations. She'd been brought in less than a year ago. Never visited the Aegis site. Never attended our 6:30 a.m. team syncs. But she had 3 Harvard certificates on her wall and a way of speaking like every sentence came from a spreadsheet. I called her extension, straight to voicemail. I called HR. They offered sincere regrets. They even couriered my personal belongings in a box labeled My C items, like my years there had already become debris. I walked into the garage and just sat in my car. Not to drive, not yet, just to think. How do you explain this to people? How do you say, I lost my job because I didn't perform loudly enough? How do you prove value when silence was always your strength? I didn't tell my family that day. I told them I had meetings, drove to a trail outside Burlington, walked until my calves hurt, thought about every late night in that glass office building, every great job said without eye contact, every time I let someone else take credit because I didn't need the spotlight, and for what I sat on a bench overlooking the escarpment, wind cutting across my cheeks, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Not sadness, not even anger, just a quiet kind of humiliation. Like I'd followed all the rules of a game I didn't realize had changed. You see, people like Patricia don't measure effort. They measure optics. And I'd been too focused on the work to see that perception was becoming more powerful than truth. But here's where things shifted. Because later that night, I got a message from Mateo, one of the junior engineers still on the Aegis project. Evan, Something's wrong with the fire suppression design schematics. I think your files were overwritten by the new lead. Can you take a look? No, sorry. You got fired. Just panic. So I opened the backup drive I still had access to, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The update they pushed live had removed one of the buffer zones near the East Tunnel Junction. That area sat directly beneath a commercial tower, and without that buffer, any fault line shift could cause catastrophic failure. Not theoretical. Not maybe someday. I mean billion-dollar liability level failure. I double-checked the original specs. My specs. They were correct. They were proven. And now, they were gone. I stared at the screen and knew one thing. I may not have been part of Evertech anymore. But if I didn't do something, that project would collapse. Literally. What do you do when the people who fired you are about to walk blindly into disaster? Do you let them? Do you warn them? Do you try to protect the thing you gave your life to build? Even after they erased your name that night, I didn't sleep. I wasn't just thinking about the project. I was thinking about how sometimes your value only becomes visible when you're no longer around to hide it. I stood in the lobby of Evertech's downtown Toronto office with nothing but a flash drive in my jacket pocket and last night's exhaustion still under my eyes. I hadn't shaved. I hadn't slept. But I had something better, the truth. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first. That stung more than I expected. I'm here to see Director Kellner, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's urgent, safety related. She tapped at her keyboard. I don't see you on the calendar. You won't, I replied. But if you don't let me up, there's a very real chance the East Tunnel of Aegis will compromise under pressure this quarter. That got her attention. 5 minutes later, I was in a glass-walled conference room with floor-to-ceiling views of the CN Tower and a mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen. Around that table were 4 executives and 2 consultants I'd never seen before, all in charcoal suits and perfectly timed nods. Patricia Kellner walked in last. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since her email, she looked uncertain. Evan, she said, smooth as ever, this isn't the best time. We're reviewing Phase 4 allocations. You might want to pause that, I said, because the version you're about to greenlight contains a structural void that could cost the province its largest infrastructure project in a decade. The silence was instant. Every face turned. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side, the first tell I'd ever seen on her. Excuse me, she said, tone clipped. I didn't answer. I reached into my coat and slid the flash drive across the table. Open it. To her credit, she did. And when the schematics came up on the projector screen, the original ones I had backed up months ago, you could feel the room shift. There's no buffer zone, said one of the consultants quietly. They removed it. Exactly, I said. And without it, that junction point sits directly under a vertical load it was never designed to hold. One tremor. One unexpected pressure shift. And we're talking sinkhole-level collapse. Someone swore under their breath. Another started typing furiously. Patricia didn't move. I expected her to argue, to deny, to find some clever way to shift blame again. But what she said next surprised me. Why wasn't this caught in review? She asked the room, not me. That's when I understood something chilling. She already knew. or at least suspected. But she'd been too busy protecting optics, her promotion, her image to double-check the details. And now I was standing in front of the very truth she had tried to delete from Evertech's memory. I could have thrown her under the bus, but I didn't. Because for me, this was never about revenge. It was about responsibility. I'm not here to get my job back, I said. I'm here because there are workers underground right now, depending on a design that isn't safe. And if something happens to them, it's on everyone in this room. She stared at me. Then she turned to the consultant beside her and said, "Shut it down. Pull Phase 4 review. Reopen with Mather's spec immediately." The others nodded, scrambled. One by one, they left the room. She stayed. "You had every right not to come back," she said finally, her voice lower. "But you did." Why? I looked out the window. You don't spend a decade building something and then walk away when someone else's ego starts wrecking it, I said. That's not who I am. And I meant it, even after everything they'd done. The quiet firings, the paper trail edits, the refusal to even say goodbye. I still believed in the work, in the purpose, in the people whose boots were on site while we sat here in glass towers. She didn't thank me. She didn't apologize. But as I walked out, I saw her speaking to the site chief on speakerphone, using my name. Not Mr. Mathers. Not former employee. Evan. That was enough. I stepped into the elevator, heart pounding in a strange rhythm. Not anger. Not pride. Something deeper. Maybe redemption. Maybe proof. That when everything's on the line and the truth finally surfaces, the quiet ones, the ones they cast aside, we're the ones who carry the whole damn thing on our backs. By the next morning, I thought things would settle. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd quietly fix the design patch over the gaps and move forward. I'd done my part. That should have been the end of it. But truth has a way of refusing to stay quiet. At 7:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. A minute later, another buzz. This time a text. Just one link. Toronto Star. Breaking news. Whistleblower exposes design flaw in province's billion-dollar infrastructure project. I stared at the headline like it wasn't real. Below it was my name. Not just my name, my full name. Evan Mathers. Former structural specialist at Evertech. Fired for lack of dedication. And now, front and center, in a national story about government funding project corruption and a single design flaw that nearly slipped through the cracks. I didn't talk to any reporters. I didn't plan to become the story. But someone in that boardroom must have spoken. And now it was out there. Not just the truth, the whole damn truth. The flaw, the file, the internal emails, even my termination notice worded carefully to avoid liability but loaded with quiet accusation. The public wasn't kind. They never are until they see blood in the water. Half of Twitter hailed me as a hero. The other half thought I'd leaked it myself for attention. Patricia's name trended second only to mine. By noon, I got an email from my old site supervisor, Jay. They're asking questions now about who approved the design, who signed off, who deleted the safety buffer from the record. Keep your head down. It's going to get ugly. It already had. But not for me. For the first time in months, I felt weightless, like the invisible pressure that had been clamped to my ribs since the day I got that HR call had finally lifted. I walked to the same cafe, I used to pass on my way to the office, ordered a black coffee, sat by the window. People walked by with newspapers folded under their arms, and I saw my own face on the front page. I should have been humiliated, but instead, I felt seen. I remembered a moment from 3 years ago. We were up north at a frozen oversight, reviewing steel tension under -30 wind chill. Everyone else had gone back inside to warm up. I stayed, not because I had to, but because that's what the work demanded. That's who I was, not loud, not political, but consistent, present. The kind of person who doesn't walk away when things get uncomfortable. And now, that part of me was finally being recognized, at least by the public. Evertech was silent. No official statement. No media response. But behind closed doors, I knew they were panicking. I wasn't the only one with backup files. Wasn't the only one who saw things and stayed quiet too long. 1 week later, it broke again. This time, not about me, but about the people above Patricia. The procurement office, the regional minister, the rushed green lights, the bonuses tied to early delivery. It wasn't just a flaw. It was a cover-up. And now, the story had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I became a symbol, not by choice, but by truth. The quiet worker pushed out. The one labeled not committed. The man they erased until they couldn't anymore. And the irony, it all began because I kept one flash drive, one tiny act of self-respect, of integrity, in a world obsessed with speed, with profit, with silence. Sometimes the loudest statement is the one you don't mean to make. You just refuse to forget what really happened, and refuse to let them pretend it didn't. It was a Thursday when Patricia's face finally appeared on camera. Not a press conference, not a glossy corporate interview. It was a shaky live stream outside her condo in downtown Toronto, reporters shouting over one another as she rushed toward a waiting car. No makeup, no polished statement, just a woman caught under the weight of a truth she'd tried to bury. I sat on my couch, the sound on mute, watching the captions scroll. Ms. Gervais, did you knowingly sign off on the faulty design? Was Evan Mathers fired as retaliation for speaking up? Are you cooperating with the ministry's internal investigation? She didn't say a word, didn't need to. Her silence said more than a statement ever could. My inbox started to flood again, this time from unfamiliar names. Former colleagues, engineers from other firms. One said, "You took the hit for a lot of us. We owe you." Another, "I walked away from a project just like that 2 years ago. Wish I'd stood my ground." But the message that struck deepest came late that night, from Patricia. I almost didn't open it. Subject line: for what it's worth. The email was short, just 3 lines. You were right. I knew. I chose the timeline over the truth. I'm sorry. That was it. No explanation. No justification. And yet, I believed her, because I'd seen it up close, that slow erosion of integrity. It doesn't come in automatic form. It comes in compromises, in phrases like, "We'll fix it later," or nobody will notice. Patricia didn't start out as corrupt. She started out like me, overworked, determined, trying to survive inside a system that rewards results, not questions. But at some point, she stopped pushing back, and I didn't, and that was the difference. The next morning, the project made national headlines again, this time for being suspended pending a full audit. Millions frozen. Construction halted. The government called it a precautionary measure, but everyone knew. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about accountability. 2 directors resigned within 48 hours. Patricia was placed on indefinite leave. And as for me, I got a call from a number I'd never seen before. A woman's voice introduced herself as a recruiter for a new oversight committee forming under the Ministry of Infrastructure. Mr. Mathers, we're assembling a review panel. Independent experts. People with experience in project safety and ethical compliance. Your name's been recommended more than once. I asked her who recommended me. She just said, a few people who read the full story. I didn't accept right away. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about healing something inside me that had cracked the day I got fired, not just from a job, but from the belief that honesty mattered. Now, people were listening again. Later that week, I walked past the Evertech building on Front Street. Same glass walls, same security desk, same silence. I didn't go in and didn't need to. I'd already taken back everything they tried to erase. My voice, my credibility, and oddly enough, my future. Sometimes vindication doesn't come in a courtroom or a headline. It comes when you sit quietly across from yourself and realize you didn't bend, you didn't flinch, you didn't lose who you were to keep what you had. That's the real victory, not applause, not awards, but knowing that even if they pushed you out, you never pushed yourself down, and that's something they can't take from you. 2 months later, I stood on the stage of the Ontario Infrastructure Transparency Summit, held inside the glass atrium of a government building I never thought I'd step foot in again. Behind me, a screen displayed a simple message: Voices from the ground, why whistleblowers matter. My name was printed right beneath it. The moment they handed me the microphone, the room got quiet. Not because I was famous, but because I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere. If things had gone their way, I would have disappeared with a severance agreement, a non-disclosure clause, and a quiet exit out the back door. But instead, I was here, and everyone was watching. I took a breath, not to calm nerves, but to remember why I came. There's something strange that happens. I began when your career ends in a boardroom, but your story begins after. A few nods in the front row. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to do my job and do it right. But when doing it right meant saying something uncomfortable, my dedication became a liability. I paused. Eyes flicked to a row of Evertech executives seated quietly in the back. I recognized 2 of them. They didn't nod. Let me be clear. I wasn't perfect. I missed things. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken sooner. But when I finally did speak, I was punished for it. Now, the room was still, like everyone was holding their breath. But here's the irony. The same flaw I flagged the one I was dismissed over was the very thing that saved the province hundreds of millions. It saved time. It saved lives. And maybe more importantly, it forced this conversation. A small wave of applause. Not polite, earnest. And that's why I came today, I continued. Not to settle scores, but to remind every single person in this room, integrity doesn't scream. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't manipulate. It simply stands, quietly, even when it's alone. The applause rose, and just for a second, I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. Not because I needed validation, but because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. After the panel ended, I stepped outside into the cool spring air. Toronto was just waking up for the weekend. Streetcars clattered past. A woman on the sidewalk looked at me, blinked, and said, "Hey, are you the guy from the whistleblower story?" I smiled. "Yeah, that's me." "Good for you," she said. "Took guts." That was the best compliment I'd heard in years. Later that afternoon, I got a call from someone unexpected. Patricia. She sounded different, softer, slower. "I watched your speech," she said. "I thought you were gracious." I said what needed to be said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she added, "I've stepped down. Officially. Took a lot longer than it should have." There was nothing left to argue. No bitterness, no gloating. Just two people who once built the same bridge and now stood on opposite ends of it. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, "but I'm moving on." "I hope you do," she whispered, "and I hope they don't waste what you gave them." Click. That was the last time I heard her voice. 3 weeks later, I got an email from a university in British Columbia. They wanted me to guest lecture, not on engineering, but on resilience. They'd read the story, watched the clips, and thought their students needed to hear it. Not the scandal, not the politics, but the human part. And that's what I said yes to. Because the real victory wasn't the suspension of the project, or the panel, or the press coverage. It was sitting across from a room of 23-year-olds and telling them, you don't have to choose between your job and your principles. Not forever. Not if you're willing to walk through fire to keep your name intact. And in the back of that lecture hall, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "But didn't you lose everything?" I smiled. "No," I said. "I lost what they thought defined me, but I kept what mattered." If you've ever been underestimated, pushed out, or punished for doing the right thing, this story is for you. Let it remind you. You may not win in the moment, but truth, when patient, always wins in the end. Tap. Like if this hit home and share your story below. You never know who it might help.